Do black people deserve reparations? The short answer is yes. Black people are deserving of reparations for a number of compelling reasons that are rooted in both historical injustice and contemporary inequality. The case for reparations isn't just about addressing past wrongs, but is also about acknowledging the ongoing impact of centuries of racial oppression. Below are the primary reasons why black people are deserving of reparations. First, let's talk about historical injustices. Black people in America were forcibly enslaved for over 200 years, during which time they endured brutal exploitation, violence, and dehumanization. Enslaved people were critical to the building of America's economy, particularly through their labor on plantations and in industries, yet they were denied the fruits of their labor. After the Civil War, during Reconstruction, black families were promised land and resources to rebuild their lives, famously encapsulated in the 40 acres and a mule promise, but these promises were largely never fulfilled. Instead, black people faced systematic efforts to keep them economically and socially oppressed. After Reconstruction, laws known as Jim Crow laws were implemented to enforce racial segregation and disenfranchise black people. These laws systematically denied black people access to quality education, healthcare, housing, and fair treatment in the justice system, effectively locking them into poverty and oppression. For much of the 20th century, black families were denied access to homeownership through discriminatory practices like redlining, which kept them from building wealth through property ownership, one of the most significant sources of wealth accumulation in the U.S. Now, let's move on to ongoing systemic inequality. The effects of slavery and segregation are still felt today in the vast racial wealth gap. According to studies, the median net worth of black households is a fraction of that of white households, largely due to historical discrimination in education, employment, and housing. The wealth gap is passed down from generation to generation, as black families continue to face barriers to economic mobility. This gap is not just the result of individual choices or actions, but stems directly from historical policies and practices that deprived black families of resources and opportunities. Despite legal advancements, black people still face discrimination in hiring, pay, and promotion in the workplace. Educational inequality continues, with black children more likely to attend underfunded schools, and the criminal justice system disproportionately incarcerates black people. Finally, let's discuss the moral and ethical grounds for reparations. Reparations are a way to make amends for the harm done to black people by centuries of exploitation. Just as we provide restitution for victims of modern-day crimes like fraud, theft, and personal injury, reparations are a moral way of addressing the harm caused by the racial injustices of the past. Reparations are about recognizing and addressing the debt owed to black communities for the wealth and opportunities built from their forced labor, the denial of their basic human rights, and the ongoing legacy of oppression. Legal precedents show that reparations are not a new concept. The U.S. government has provided reparations to Japanese Americans who were interned during World War II, to Native American tribes, and even to Holocaust survivors. These reparations were based on the recognition that past wrongs had ongoing impacts on the communities harmed, and that some form of restitution was owed. Other nations, such as Germany after World War II, have provided reparations to address the crimes of the Holocaust. These global precedents demonstrate that reparations are a recognized method of dealing with historical injustices. Reparations can be a powerful tool for closing the racial wealth gap, helping to reduce poverty, and creating greater economic mobility. Addressing the historical injustices that have led to inequality will not only benefit black communities, but will also contribute to the overall health of the nation's economy. Reparations can foster social healing by acknowledging the trauma of slavery and racism, leading to a more just and cohesive society. By rectifying these wrongs, the nation can move forward with a greater sense of collective responsibility and unity. Reparations offer a way to restore trust between black communities and the broader society, showing a commitment to addressing the legacy of inequality and opening doors for more equitable social and economic relationships. Reparations are about empowering black communities to overcome the barriers placed in their way. It's not just about financial compensation, but also about enabling communities to invest in their own futures. whether through education, business development, housing, or healthcare. Reparations would provide a much-needed foundation for future generations, allowing them to start at a level playing field, where they are not held back by the injustices that their ancestors endured. Conclusion: Black people are deserving of reparations because the historical and systemic oppression they've endured has had lasting effects that continue to manifest in the wealth gap, social inequality, and disenfranchisement. Reparations are a moral, ethical, and practical response to centuries of harm and can provide a meaningful pathway to greater justice, equity, and healing for the nation as a whole. The argument for reparations isn't just about correcting the past, it's about creating a more equitable and just future for everyone. If the above is true, then why does the majority of the dominant society not agree? The resistance of the majority of the dominant society to reparations for Black people stems from a combination of factors, including historical misconceptions, economic fears, racial prejudices, and political ideologies. These reasons are complex and often involve deeply ingrained beliefs about race, justice, and entitlement. Here's a breakdown of the key reasons why many in the dominant society do not agree with reparations. Misunderstanding or denial of historical injustices. Lack of awareness or acknowledgement. Many people in the dominant society are not fully aware of the historical atrocities committed against Black people, such as slavery, segregation, or redlining. There is often a tendency to downplay or deny the scale of the impact these systems had on Black communities. Historical amnesia. Some people are simply unaware of the long-standing effects of systemic racism. There's a tendency to focus on the present and claim that because slavery ended over 150 years ago, the legacy of that harm has already been worn off. This view overlooks how generations of Black Americans were denied opportunities for upward mobility due to systemic discrimination. Discomfort with confronting the past. For some, acknowledging the extent of past wrongs and the continuing effects of those injustices is too uncomfortable. There is an emotional resistance to acknowledging the nation's own role in perpetuating oppression and inequality. Economic fears are, well, one of the most common arguments against reparations. Critics often ask, how much would reparations cost, and how could the United States afford it? The fear is that reparations would require massive government expenditures, which some argue could lead to tax increases or financial instability. There's also a misunderstanding of the impact. Many believe that reparations would only take the form of direct payments, but this is a narrow view. Reparations could be implemented through various means, such as investments in education, healthcare, housing, or tax relief, that benefit both Black communities and the nation as a whole. However, this broader understanding is not always communicated effectively. Racial prejudices and resistance to racial equality play significant roles in the opposition to reparations. Deep-seated racial prejudices contribute to this resistance. Many individuals in the dominant society maintain beliefs about racial hierarchy and superiority, which may cause them to resist the idea that Black people are owed anything. The notion that Black Americans should receive compensation challenges these deeply entrenched beliefs. Some people in the dominant society fear that reparations will significantly alter the social order. There's a concern that it would diminish their own power, privilege, and access to resources, even if those advantages are indirect and come from historical injustice. Additionally, many people subscribe to a colorblind ideology, which posits that race should not matter in policies or social interactions. They may argue that everyone should be treated equally today, and any discussion of reparations may feel to them like an unfair preference for one group over another. This view overlooks the structural and historical context of racial inequality. There's also a strong belief in American culture that anyone can succeed if they work hard enough. This pull-yourself-up-by-the-bootstraps mentality can lead to the argument that Black people should not receive reparations because, in their view, success is a result of personal effort rather than systemic barriers. This viewpoint fails to acknowledge how generations of systemic racism have created obstacles for many Black people. Political ideologies and misinformation also play a crucial role in the opposition to reparations. Some conservatives or libertarians argue against reparations from a political standpoint, claiming that it is un-American to provide reparations. They may view reparations as an overreach of government power, a form of collectivism, or even as a violation of property rights. There's also a fear of divisiveness. Some people worry that reparations would create division or resentment between racial groups. They fear that reparations could deepen racial tensions, rather than heal them. This concern is often based on the assumption that a direct transfer of wealth or resources would lead to a backlash, or perceived unfairness. Lastly, the issue of reparations has become highly polarized in the political sphere. Many in the dominant society view reparations through the lens of party politics, seeing it as a left-wing agenda. As a result, opposition to reparations can be driven by partisan loyalty, where people reject ideas simply because they are associated with a particular political ideology or figure. Deservingness and victimhood narratives. There is a narrative in parts of the dominant society that questions whether black people are deserving of reparations. This narrative often revolves around the idea that black people are perpetually victims, and that reparations might reward victimhood or encourage a culture of dependency. This idea often stems from stereotypes about black people and a misunderstanding of the ongoing impacts of systemic racism. Some in the dominant society believe that reparations should only be given to groups who have been perfect victims with clear-cut, immediate harm. The complex and interwoven history of black oppression, along with the fact that it continues to impact modern generations, makes it harder for some people to accept that reparations are appropriate. Distrust of government solutions. Some Americans are skeptical about the government's ability to implement reparations effectively. They fear that reparations might be poorly administered or misused. This is a concern that transcends race and is often seen in discussions of any large-scale government program. Impact of media and cultural representation. Media plays a large role in shaping public opinion, and mainstream media often frames the conversation around reparations in a negative or simplified light. Many media outlets focus on the most extreme, divisive opinions or misrepresent the scope of reparations, for example, focusing on the idea of direct cash payments rather than broader investments. This can skew public perception and create a narrative that reparations are impractical or unjust. Popular media and culture often perpetuate harmful stereotypes about black people, portraying them as lazy, criminal, or undeserving. These stereotypes are part of a broader narrative that black people don't need reparations, further entrenching societal resistance. Conclusion. The resistance to reparations among the majority of the dominant society is rooted in a complex mixture of ignorance, economic fears, racial prejudices, political ideologies, and cultural narratives. Addressing these concerns requires not only educating people about the historical and ongoing impacts of systemic racism, but also fostering a more empathetic understanding of justice, healing, and shared responsibility for creating a fairer society. As conversations about reparations evolve, it will take sustained effort to overcome these barriers and build a broader consensus around the moral, ethical, and practical need for reparations. We hope you found this educational and thank you for joining us. Please hit the like button and subscribe, and by all means remember to leave a comment.